Join me as I spend the night in this haunted attic to uncover the source of those mysterious noises. You know, I've always been fascinated by the idea of haunted attics. I mean, there's something about the creaky floorboards, the dusty trunks, and the eerie silence that just sends chills down my spine. And I'm not alone. Every year, thousands of people claim to have experienced paranormal activity in their attics. But what's really going on up there? Is it just the wind? Or is something more sinister at play? I've been exploring this attic for weeks, and let me tell you, it's been a wild ride. Every night, I hear the strangest noises, creaks, groans, and even what sounds like whispers. It's like the attic is trying to tell me something, but I just can't quite decipher the message. I've tried to investigate, but every door I open just leads to more questions. What's behind that strange tapping sound? Are those footsteps I hear? Or just the house settling? I've been recording the noises, and I have to say, they're pretty creepy. There's this one sound that's like a low, mournful sigh. It sends shivers down my spine every time I hear it. And then there are the knocks, loud, sharp raps that seem to come from nowhere. I've tried to communicate with whatever is making the noises, but so far, I've gotten nothing. Just silence. But the noises aren't the only strange thing about this attic. You see, I've started to notice patterns. The noises seem to happen at the same time every night, and they're always loudest near the old trunk in the corner. I've tried to open it, but it's locked tight. What's inside? Is it something malevolent? Or just a bunch of old clothes? There are so many theories about what could be causing these noises. Some people say it's just the wind or the house settling, but I'm not so sure. I've heard stories about attics being portals to other dimensions or gateways for spirits to enter our world. And then there are the more rational explanations. Maybe it's just a structural issue or a family of critters who've taken up residence. One thing's for sure, though. This attic is definitely haunted. I've been researching folklore, and I've found some pretty interesting connections. You see, in some cultures, attics are believed to be sacred spaces, where the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. And what about all those old wives' tales about spirits being drawn to certain objects or sounds? Is it possible that this attic is some kind of magnet for the paranormal? Last night, I experienced something that really freaked me out. I was sitting in the attic, trying to record some evidence, when I heard this loud, crashing sound. It was like something had fallen off the shelf, but when I went to investigate, everything was still intact. But here's the weird part. When I played back the recording, I heard a voice. It was low and gravelly, and it seemed to be saying something, but I just couldn't make out the words. Of course, I've been going over that recording again and again, trying to enhance the sound, but so far, I've gotten nothing. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I know what I heard, and it's got me spooked. As I reflect on my time in this haunted attic, I'm left with more questions than answers. What's really going on up here? Is it just my imagination? Or is something more sinister at play? I may never know for sure, but one thing's for sure. This experience has left me shaken. Thanks for watching, and if you've had any experiences with haunted places, be sure to share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more ghost hunting adventures, and I'll catch you in the next video. The Attic Whispers, Part 1. It was late October when I first stepped into the attic. The house I just moved into was an old, creaking Victorian. The kind of place where the floorboards groan underfoot, even when you're just standing still, and the wallpaper peels in long, curling strips that look like fingers reaching out. But it wasn't the house itself that drew me in. No, it was that attic. I don't know if it was something I'd read once, or maybe some half-baked fascination with the paranormal, but I'd always felt attics had secrets. And this one was no different. I still remember the chill I felt when I pushed open that little door for the first time. Dust particles floated through the thin slice of light, and I swear, just for a second, I could hear breathing. But I brushed it off. Old houses breathe too, I told myself. The first few nights were quiet, eerily so. Then the noises started. At first, it was just a gentle creak, the kind of sound you might hear in an old wooden house, like a faint whisper of settling wood. But as the nights passed, the sounds grew louder. There was a strange, rhythmic tapping that started at exactly 3 a.m., every night without fail. It would go on for 3 or 4 minutes, then stop. It felt purposeful, almost like Morse code, but with no discernible pattern. It just stopped. It was the whispers that really got under my skin, though. It started as a faint, almost inaudible hiss, just the barest suggestion of a voice. I could never make out what it was saying, but it sounded urgent, like it was trying to tell me something. I started recording the sounds, hoping that playing them back later might reveal something I couldn't hear in the moment. But when I listened to them, they just sounded hollow, like the echoes of something no longer alive. I remember the first time I felt true fear in that attic. I had just settled down to record, a blanket pulled tightly around my shoulders, when a loud crash shattered the silence. I whipped my flashlight around, but everything was exactly as I'd left it. Nothing out of place. Yet when I played back the recording, there was something there, a low, gravelly voice, whispering in a language I didn't recognize. I could feel the cold seep through me, a creeping dread I couldn't shake. Then I noticed something else. Every time I entered the attic, the sounds were strongest near this old trunk in the far corner. The lock was rusted over, but it had an aura that felt wrong, like it didn't want me to get too close. But the more nights I spent in that attic, the stronger the urge grew to open it, like it held some kind of answer I desperately needed to understand. Something was in there, something that whispered, groaned, and tapped. Something that wanted to get out. The Attic Whispers, Part 2. The next night, I brought a crowbar with me. Something about that trunk gnawed at me constantly, like a song you can't get out of your head, each note taunting me. And though I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just curiosity, deep down, I knew it was more than that. I felt like the attic was pulling me in, drawing me closer to some truth I didn't want to face. I climbed the narrow staircase around 2 a.m., flashlight in hand, the air thick with dust. The tapping had already started by the time I got up there, sharp and insistent, as if it had been waiting for me. It was louder tonight, and I realized that it wasn't just tapping. It was a rhythm, a pattern, like the same short, urgent sequence repeated over and over, almost pleading. My heart hammered as I took each step, feeling the weight of whatever watched me from the shadows. The trunk sat in its usual place in the far corner, half hidden beneath an old, moth-eaten blanket. With a quick tug, I pulled the blanket off, and for the first time, I saw something etched into the wood. Faint marks, scratches, no letters. They looked crude and jagged, like someone had scratched them in with broken nails. They spelled something old, something I couldn't understand, but I felt its weight all the same. I jammed the crowbar under the trunk's lid and began prying it open. The wood groaned in protest, echoing around the room. Each pull brought me closer to whatever lay inside. And then, with one final heave, the lock broke and the lid creaked open. Inside, there were letters. Dozens of them, bound together with a frayed black ribbon. They looked ancient, the edges yellowed, the ink faded. The dates were from decades ago, some as far back as the 1920s. My fingers shook as I picked up the first one. The handwriting was spidery and hurried, like someone had been desperate to get their words onto paper before they ran out of time. "I know you're here," the letter read. I can feel you watching me, whispering to me. But I won't look at you, no matter how much you beg. The air in the attic felt denser, pressing down on me like a weight. I felt the urge to leave, to close the trunk and run back downstairs, but I couldn't stop reading. The words pulled me in, each letter unraveling a life-strange fragments of confessions, apologies, warnings. In the next letter, the handwriting changed, a different author entirely. I've heard the tapping every night. It's always right behind me, but when I turn around, there's nothing. Just shadows. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Another. It came to me in my dreams last night. A face old, withered, and waiting. It whispered my name over and over, promising things I can't repeat. I know what it wants, and I won't give it to him. I won't. The last letter was the worst. The ink was smeared, blotted as though the writer had been crying. It's getting closer. I can feel it every night, watching me. It knows my thoughts, my fears. Tonight, I think it's going to come for me. If anyone reads this, don't listen to the whispers. Don't open. And there it ended, with a thick, dark smear of ink, as though the pen had skidded off the page. I dropped the letter, my heart pounding as a cold sweat slicked my skin. The whispers grew louder, and this time, I swear, they said my name. Just a soft, dragging whisper, stretched out as if savoring the taste of each syllable. Come closer, it hissed. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the trunk, the letters scattered around me like dead leaves. I could still hear the whispering, but it wasn't coming from the trunk anymore. It was coming from behind me. The Attic Whispers, Part 3. I froze, too terrified to turn around, every nerve on edge as the whispering grew louder. It was an almost inaudible rasp, like a voice dragged through gravel. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen, hoping, praying it was just my imagination. But I knew better. That voice was real, and it was getting closer, each syllable creeping up my spine. Slowly I turned, feeling every beat of my heart thud painfully against my ribs. There was nothing there. Just empty darkness stretching across the attic, my flashlight casting thin beams that barely pierced the shadows. The relief was brief. I knew I wasn't alone. The air was too thick, charged with something that felt like anger. It felt like I'd woken something up, something that didn't want to be disturbed. And then the tapping started again. This time, it was different, faster, sharper, almost frantic. I scanned the room, trying to pinpoint the sound. It seemed to echo, bouncing off the walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Desperate to escape, I turned toward the door, gripping the crowbar tightly. But then, just as I reached the door, I heard it. A single chilling whisper, right by my ear. Look inside the wall. I jerked back, heart pounding, and instinctively shone my flashlight across the far side of the attic. In the dim beam, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a faint outline in the wall, as though part of the plaster had been hastily patched up. The edges were cracked and uneven, barely visible under a layer of dust. I felt a strange compulsion to go over to it. The crowbar felt heavy in my hand, and before I could talk myself out of it, I'd already crossed the room, crouching down to inspect the strange patch in the wall. With a deep breath, I slid the crowbar into the gap and pushed. The plaster cracked and crumbled away, revealing an opening just wide enough to see into. And inside, I saw another trunk, smaller than the first, dusty and wedged tightly into the wall. My hands shook as I reached in and dragged it out, my fingers leaving trails in the dust. This trunk didn't have a lock, just a rusty latch that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. I flipped it open. The stench hit me first, a rotten, sickly sweet smell, like something decaying. Inside, wrapped in thin, brittle cloth, lay a set of small, delicate bones. A tiny rib cage, a fragile skull, half buried in dirt and dried leaves. The horror of it struck me immediately. This was a child. I recoiled, nearly falling back in my rush to put distance between myself and the trunk. But then, from within, I heard it again, that low, mournful sigh I'd been recording every night. Only this time it was loud, and it seemed to fill the entire attic, echoing through the walls. The temperature plummeted, my breath fogging in the beam of the flashlight. The whispering returned, now louder, angrier, as if demanding something from me. And then, as I tried to stand, I felt an icy pressure on my shoulder, holding me down. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, as the voice hissed in my ear again. "You've seen too much." In a blind panic, I stumbled back, pulling away from the invisible grip. I bolted for the door, not daring to look back. As I threw myself down the stairs, the attic erupted in noise behind me. Thudding footsteps, angry whispers, and that sharp, rhythmic tapping, echoing down the walls like a heartbeat. I didn't stop until I was back in my bedroom, locking the door behind me, my chest heaving as I tried to calm down. But as I pressed my back against the wall, gasping for air, I realized I wasn't alone. Somehow, the whispers had followed me downstairs. And they were closer than ever. The Attic Whispers, Part 4. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the whispers, faint but relentless, drifting through the walls. A voice was low, angry, and insistent. And that tapping sound, it had followed me downstairs, drumming from inside the walls right behind my bed. By dawn, I was running on pure terror and exhaustion. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that the bones in the attic had triggered some kind of hallucination. But the truth gnawed at me. Whatever haunted that attic was very real, and it wasn't done with me yet. By mid-morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to be bullied out of my own house. I grabbed my flashlight, a recorder, and a notebook, and forced myself back up the stairs, bracing for whatever might come next. The air grew colder with every step, and as I opened the attic door, a wave of dread washed over me, but I pushed through it. The trunk was still there, the lid half open. The bones inside seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if they'd been waiting for me to return. I steadied myself, took a deep breath, and reached in, hoping to find anything that might explain the dark presence in my house. My hand brushed something cold and metallic, buried under the bones, a small locket. Tarnished and ancient, it looked like it had been in there for decades. I opened it carefully, revealing a faded photograph of a little girl with dark eyes and a serious expression. I couldn't explain why, but something about her face sent a chill down my spine. Then, as I examined the locket, I noticed tiny initials scratched into the back. EP. The letters were so faint I could barely make them out, but they seemed familiar. And then I remembered why. They were the same initials I'd seen scratched onto the trunk's lid. The little girl in the photo must have been the one buried in the wall, hidden away for reasons I couldn't yet fathom. I whispered her initials aloud, almost as if testing them. And that's when everything changed. A sharp, cold wind blasted through the attic, swirling dust and loose papers around me. The whispers surged, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. Words, accusations, pleas, they all jumbled together, indistinct and chaotic, filling the room with a raw, almost desperate energy. My head pounded, and I stumbled back, pressing my hands over my ears, but the voices grew louder, as if they were inside me, clawing their way into my mind. Find him. Find him. The voice was clear, this time singular focused, dripping with rage. I didn't understand, but I could feel its urgency, its need for justice, or perhaps revenge. Whoever this little girl was, she wanted something from me. And I had the sickening feeling I was already too involved to walk away. The attic door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. My flashlight flickered, then went out completely, leaving me alone in the pitch black with nothing but the whispers. I fumbled in the dark, trying to find the door, but it was as if the room had changed, stretching into an endless void. The walls shifted, the floor felt uneven beneath my feet. I had no sense of direction, only the feeling of something pressing down on me, something malevolent, watching my every move. And then I felt a cold breath against my neck. I whipped around, but there was only darkness. My own breathing sounded harsh and frantic in the silence, but that wasn't the only sound. There was another noise, soft and rhythmic, coming from just behind me. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer with each second. They stopped just behind me, and I felt that icy pressure again, this time on my shoulder. A voice whispered in my ear, so close I could feel the chill of it. He's still here. He never left. I bolted, feeling my way to the door, wrenching it open and stumbling back down the stairs. But the whispers followed, that low, insistent voice echoing in my ears, haunting me with every step. By the time I reached the ground floor, I was shaking, barely able to breathe. I locked myself in my room, desperate to escape the voices, the footsteps, the cold that seemed to seep into my bones. But as I leaned against the door, heart racing, I realized something horrifying. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was closer, louder, as if whatever haunted the attic had followed me, and I was trapped with it now, alone in the house. And then I heard a soft, faint scratching coming from inside my walls. John Doe, the 4th of November 2024, 11:09. The Attic Whispers, Part 5. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I'd hear that faint, maddening scratching in the walls. The whispers, too, were relentless, drifting through the house like smoke, sometimes soft and pleading, other times venomous and accusing. My nerves were frayed, and I knew I was reaching my breaking point. The little girl in the locket EP, she wanted something. And until I figured out what it was, I knew this nightmare would only get worse. Desperation led me to dig into the house's history. I spent hours scouring local archives, combing through every old record I could find. Finally, I found a single mention of a girl named Evelyn Pierce, who had lived in the house nearly a century ago. She'd vanished at just 7 years old, and her case had been marked as unsolved. A cold case that had long since faded from memory. But one detail stood out. Evelyn's father, a man named Isaac Pierce, had been known for his violent temper, and the whispers around town had suggested that he'd been abusive, though no one had dared speak out against him. As I read through the accounts, a sickening thought crept over me. What if Evelyn hadn't vanished at all? What if she had been hidden? Buried, right here in the walls of the attic? The realization hit me like a blow, and the pieces fell into place. Evelyn's spirit was trapped here, unable to find peace. And the tapping, the whispers, the cold that seeped through the house, it was all her. She'd been waiting, watching, for someone to find her, to give her the justice she never received. I knew what I had to do. The next night, I climbed back into the attic, trembling as I crossed the floor toward the wall where I'd found her bones. The air was thick with tension, every shadow seeming to ripple and twist, as though the attic itself were alive, watching my every move. I knelt beside the opening in the wall, clutching a flashlight and a small hammer, and began chipping away at the edges, widening the hole. The moment I broke through, a blast of icy air rushed out, filling the attic with the scent of decay. But I kept going, pulling at the crumbling plaster until I'd created an opening big enough to reach inside. And then I found it something cold and metallic, hidden deeper within the wall. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was a small, rusted locket, identical to the one I'd found in the trunk. But inside this one, there was no photograph, only a scrap of paper, yellowed and brittle with age. I unfolded it, my hands shaking, and saw the message scrawled in faded ink. He is with me always, watching, waiting. He will not let me rest. My blood ran cold. Evelyn hadn't just been a victim. She was trapped here, held by something darker, something that had bound her spirit to this place. Her father, Isaac, he'd done something unspeakable, something that had cursed her soul to remain, caught between worlds. The moment I read the note, the whispers erupted around me, louder than ever, filling the attic with a cacophony of voices, Evelyn's cries, her father's cold, mocking laugh, and something else. A low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the walls. I stumbled back, feeling an invisible force press against me, something heavy and suffocating, as though the very air were turning against me. He never left. The voice was deep, filled with malice, and it echoed through the attic, filling every corner, every shadow. And then, in the darkness, I saw him, a shape, barely visible, a figure hunched and twisted, watching me with eyes that seemed to burn with hatred. Isaac. I could feel him, his rage, his bitterness, the weight of his anger pressing down on me like a lead weight. He wasn't just a ghost, he was something far worse. A shadow, a curse that had clung to this house, feeding on fear, on despair. And now he was coming for me. John Doe, the 4th of November 2024, 11:09, Amity. I backed toward the door, my hands shaking, but the door slammed shut before I could reach it. The whispers grew louder, the shadows closing in, and I knew I had only one chance. I clutched the locket, Evelyn's locket, and whispered her name, over and over, a desperate plea for her to hear me, to know I was here to help. The room went still, a silence so complete it felt like the world itself had stopped. And then I felt it, a warmth, faint but unmistakable, as though someone were standing beside me. I looked down and saw her, a faint, ghostly figure of a little girl, her dark eyes staring up at me with a mixture of fear and hope. Evelyn, I whispered, barely able to breathe. It's time to go. She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. But as she turned, a shadow loomed over her, Isaac's form taking shape, his twisted hands reaching out. He wouldn't let her go. His voice, low and venomous, echoed through the attic, filling it with a darkness that seemed to choke the very air. But Evelyn wasn't afraid anymore. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a defiance that sent a shiver down my spine. She reached out, grabbing his hand, and in that moment, I felt a surge of energy, something ancient and powerful, as though the weight of her suffering, her pain, was finally being released. The shadows convulsed, Isaac's figure twisting, writhing, as though her touch were burning him. And then, with a final shuddering scream, he vanished, the darkness dissipating, leaving only silence. Evelyn looked at me one last time, a faint smile on her face, before she too faded, her spirit finally free. I left the attic that night, feeling lighter than I had in days, as though a weight had been lifted from the house. The whispers, the tapping, the shadows, they were all gone. Evelyn was at peace, and the curse that had haunted this place for so long had finally been broken. But sometimes, in the stillness of night, I think I can still hear a faint, distant whisper, like a voice carried on the wind, soft and gentle. Thank you. End of the story.